Welcome to Now and Next in Public Affairs, brought to you by Helio Intelligence, the home of de Havilland and Forefront. I'm Jack Tolbert, and today we're in Cardiff and we're going to discuss the future of the public affairs profession with Paul Smith. Paul, welcome.
Shemai, Jack.
Thank you very much. For all the listeners out there, we've had a bit of a journey, and not getting to Cardiff, but in terms of recording the session today. So we're very, very happy to get started. Of course, the focus of these podcasts is around the future of public affairs, and we're going to focus today on Wales, which feels timely. We're actually recording on Budget Day, so it is the 26th of November, and we're yet to see what the Chancellor is going to say, but no doubt it's going to have an impact on things next year, and this episode will actually go live in January. So really looking forward to getting into the discussion with Paul. Paul, maybe if I give our listeners a bit of a brief about yourself. You've been working in public affairs in Wales for over 12 years in roles with the Conservative Party, as well as the RSPCA, the Welsh Conservatives, and your current role as Policy and Public Affairs Lead for the Royal College of Occupational Therapists. Can you talk us through a little bit about how public affairs has changed, evolved in your time?
So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for me. I grew up in the Southwest, moved over here for work with the Conservative Party, running campaigns in South, Mid and West Wales. And there has been a shift. So when I went to go work for RSPCA Cymru, looking after their public affairs, we were just getting that shift not onto online, onto a little bit of AI, a little bit of public engagement. Social media had really taken off. And it was like, well, what is the next thing? And so many companies had tried things before. And I used to work for an MP, and it was getting stale from our point of view. So you would get, and I'm sure many listeners will appreciate this, you'd get thousands of emails from people, and all they've done is gone to a website, clicked a campaign, put in their name, and actually even easier on your phone, they just started typing their name, then it auto fills it out for you. That gets sent to your MP, and off it goes. The MP gets it, and they're like, great, thanks for this. I've got 1,000 of these. What do I do with them? Log them on the spreadsheet, email back, done. And so things were starting to change. Places, software like Engaging Network, where you could actually vary the content that people signed that was then sent to the politician. That was new to me. And I felt crossed over, that was new to the sector as well. So that's been interesting how that's shifted. And then seeing where AI takes us now, how working from home has changed things, how politics has changed, how MSs in Wales are engaging with public affairs, and all of that has shifted. And certainly with the elections coming up, what that actually means for the future.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about AI a little bit later. In terms of working from home, we've talked about the impact of COVID with previous guests on public affairs. Can you talk us through a little bit about, I guess, what public affairs was like in Wales before COVID and after COVID?
So we're a really friendly bunch here. Everyone knows everyone. There's a BBC podcast where I think one of the presenters does, what the 6 degrees of separation between presenter and a random caller from Wales. And that is true. Like, it doesn't take 6, it's 2 or 3. We all know each other. We all know each other's past as well. So
the question was about, this is brilliant. The question was about what was public affairs like pre-COVID and then post-COVID, and then with particular perspectives on kind of working from home and hybrid working.
So the key thing before was, we're all office-based, and it was going into the Senedd. It was going into Cardiff Bay to see MSs. And the key difference from a public affairs point of view is that the Senedd is still a hybrid system. So yes, MSs come down, not as many as you think, probably about half. Some come down, the Senedd sits on a Tuesday and Wednesday for plenary. Some of them come down for just Tuesdays and then head back home. Some of them come down for half a day and then head back home. And so there's lots of MSs partaking in plenary and committees remotely. So actually what that means for public affairs is that if you go down to the Senedd, you're not guaranteed to see the politician that you've targeted to see. Or, if you haven't booked a meeting, if you think you just want to take part in the Vacnad or you want to hang out in the Senedd Caff, they might not be there. And that's really frustrating. And then also, because they're working from home, we're working from home as well more. So whereas you used to go down before and chat to people and you'd make connections and you'd come up with ideas, I don't feel that happens as much. When it does happen, everyone's really excited and it's great, and you make so much progress on something because you've bumped into somebody in the Senedd Caff, in the WMC. But I feel like it's few and far between. There's organisations out there like Public Affairs Cymru, which represents the affairs sector in Wales. trying to organise days where we do descend on Cardiff Bay to keep those connections up. And networking is now more important than ever in terms of making those connections. It's fine to email somebody out of the blue, it's fine to have a Teams call, but actually there's something special about meeting someone in person. We've not to bore the listeners with the journey we've had this morning, but, you and I have spent a good 45 minutes this morning talking. I feel like I know you quite well now. That doesn't happen with Teams. You don't get that chit chat. I won't list off your personal details I've learned about you this morning, but I've learned a lot. And actually, that doesn't happen on Teams. You don't randomly learn about, your home life or what university you went to or things like that on a Teams call. It's far too formal to have that networking happen. And so networking events are really important, but it's also about making sure that they're open to everyone, so that they're not just boozy events. It's not just a case of, actually, let's have a guest speaker, let's have a dinner, let's have some booze, let's go out. It's actually, how can we do that in a better, encouraging environment? Because I think there has been a shift. And one of the things I noticed when I worked for the Welsh Conservatives in the Senate is that there's people are doing policy and public affairs. So I'm policy and public affairs lead for RCOT, but where people are more policy focused, I don't think they're as engaging as forward thinking or forward coming in terms of the public affairs professionals. And I think that's one for organisations to think about is, what do you want? Do you want a policy person or do you want a public affairs person? Yes, you can do both, but one of them suffers. And what do you want your organisation to achieve from hiring that individual?
That's really thought-provoking for me. I've definitely learned a lot just listening to you in this short space of time. The networking thing is something I would like to focus on. And when I say networking, I think it's this dynamic between hybrid and in-person. You quite rightly outlined that hybrid is more of a thing now, and there's quite a logical challenge that comes with that, where if you're trying to engage and influence with political stakeholders and they're not accessible in person, then how do you do that? Because to your point, the information that I've learned about you and the information that you've learned about me in the time it took us to get to record this episode this morning, we would never have done that on Teams. We have spoken on Teams before, but the dynamics of it just doesn't work. It really doesn't work. So for those MSs that maybe don't get down the bay as much as they would like to, because maybe even logistically, maybe you've got MSs in North Wales where if you want to get to Cardiff, you actually have to come into Liverpool and go down the M6 and the M5, the M50, because it's quicker, and it's not a quick journey, but it's quicker than driving through mid Wales. That appears to me to be quite a significant challenge for the profession moving forward, particularly with the view of having new stakeholders next year and beyond.
And the beauty of hybrid is that it improves public engagement. No more do politicians have to say to someone, actually, I can't see you on a Tuesday or Wednesday evening or Monday afternoon because I've got to be down in Cardiff Bay. Well, actually, I can come to your coffee morning on that Monday. So in terms of it, in constituency engagement, it really does help. And it really does, Senate elections. The big thing that you'll hear about next year about the Senate elections is turnout has never breached 50%. Now, that might change because there is a new party in town. Change is in the air. So that we might go over that 50%. But actually, people are still, it's 20 years, people are still asking the question, what is the Senate? What does it do? Who are my MSs? Is the other big question. And so actually having that hybrid system does mean that they can promote the Senate as a whole and devolution as a whole, rather than just thinking, I've got to drive down Monday. It's going to take me 4 hours to drive, then spend Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday's committees, drive back Thursday. So actually, the only day that I get to spend in my constituency is Friday, and then Saturday, and then possibly Sunday, unless I want a day off. So it has its positives and negatives. What also helps in Teams is being able to have that quick meeting. MS's diaries are quite chocker, maybe not as chocker as they could be, but it's just saying, well, actually, I'm launching a campaign. I need to speak to the MSs that I've targeted who I know are interested in this campaign. Let's put 30 minutes into a Teams call. Realistically, that 30 minutes is 20 minutes, if not 15 minutes. The MS is normally late. They're always eager to leave early. I'm always keen to end my meetings early to give that time as well, so the next person's on time. So it's about being succinct in your asks, but being able to do that on Teams really helps. In terms of internal, how do we promote what we're doing if actually all we're doing is sharing screenshots of us sat on Teams? That's another problem. We had an event for OT Week back in November, and we had our messages come down, we had the good old selfie square, and a pop-up and a tablecloth and all of that. And that was great because we then had the photos to share to demonstrate to our members that we were doing something. I could demonstrate to my boss and SLT, yes, the health secretary came down, we had a photo, we had photos of us chatting. And so it's like, well, if everything ends up on Teams, how do we then promote ourselves and promote our profession is what I'd be concerned about. And for those public affairs professionals who think that they can just do this job via Teams, I think they need to think about, what they can change for their internal presentation of their successes.
On the piece about your colleagues and demonstrating to colleagues and members the activity around your work and then subsequently the value of your work, that is always a consistent challenge for public affairs, irrespective whether you're Westminster focused, Brussels focused, or in the devolved. Do you have any thoughts on how public affairs is going to have to adapt, specifically in Wales, to telling that story internally in the future?
So for me, it's all about going back to basics, not to quote a Tory Prime Minister, but it's when we were campaigning, so I started life off as an election agent. And one of the things that you see now in the media, which I think is interesting, is journalists reporting on the type of campaign material that political parties are putting out. And they made a big thing here in Wales for the Caerphilly by-election about how one political party was doing supposed handwritten envelopes to people. And everyone's, oh, that's really exciting. That's not new. We were doing that 20 years ago. The only difference is we were physically handwriting them and, getting the candidate to handwrite out and then riso ink so it was a bit inky. So if you licked your finger, you could actually rub the ink. That's, that was a bit too much. But it's going back to those basics and people getting a letter through the door and they're like, oh, hang on, this isn't junk mail. This is a bit different, and opening up. And now the engagement for people, it's 10, 20 seconds from letterbox to bin. It's possibly a little bit longer now that you have to recycle it and work out which bit goes into which bin. But, it's how do you grab people as they walk from the door to the bin? So for me, I want to apply that to public affairs. I always personalise my emails to MSs. Yes, it takes a long time, but actually I think it's worth it because you can do the, dear Jack, Shemai Jack, hi Jack, great to see you last week, how's your nan type thing, and then go into your ask. And it's also being more strategic as to who you talk to. Like in the Senate elections in May, we're going to be electing 96 MSs. All 96 are not going to care about what I want to talk to them about. So it's looking at who's asking questions around health, who's asking questions about primary care or community care, and it's targeting them with that device, that handwritten letter or that personalised email or that phone call to get them engaged, to get them to pay attention as to what you want, and then putting your asks forward.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier on about software, working from home and AI. So we are going to now talk a little bit about tech and AI. Can you talk us through a little bit about what you've seen so far from AI? But what I'm really interested in unpacking is what impact do you think AI is going to have in the future for public affairs in general, but definitely public affairs here in Wales?
So I think where AI comes into its own from working, so I work from home, I work alone. What I miss being in an office is having that conversation when you're like, oh, actually, I'm thinking of doing, so we do surveys to our members of consultations that come out because we're putting the member's voice forward. And for me, I can write some questions based on the consultation and think, oh, actually, I think these are the best thing ever. Now, normally in an office, you just ping them across to your friends and just like, can you just take a look at that? And then you can ping it to someone else, but with different working times, you never know if someone's stuck on a Teams call all day, you don't get that instant response that you're used to getting. And this is where AI comes in. I do put quite a lot of my work back into AI. I've written it myself. So I'm not one of those people that will ask AI to produce something. I like to think that I've got control over what I'm producing, and then I'll stick it into AI and be like, right, here's the consultation document. Here's the suggested questions. What do you think? And then it'll come back and say, well, actually, you've not covered this point. It's like, oh yeah, I didn't realize I'd missed that. It's really handy for doing that. And then when the survey responses come back, putting that into AI, I always like to go through it myself, but just as a double checker, sticking it into AI to see what it comes up with. And of course, putting back in your final consultation response, just check the grammar for me. Have I adequately summarized what members have told me? Have I missed anything? And it's just that nice helping hand at home when actually a colleague would have done that for you in the office.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And it sounds like good practice. Do you have any thoughts on what more you might see or do or use from AI, or specifically how peers in and around Senedd may adopt it?
So I think the novelty of AI is wearing off. So, a couple of MSs that I used to work with, they were putting subjects into AI and getting AI to produce a speech based on their speaking style that it could pick up off the internet. Now, I think that's a fun thing to do to promote what AI did or what it can do. But I think actually people want to have that authentic voice. They themselves want to be able to sit down and write a speech that shows what they can do, what they're actually thinking, rather than just saying, well, these are the points I want to make, stick it in. So I think more people realize its value in terms of minute taking, in terms of report summarizing, but that's one of the things to learn for the profession. Do we need, well, it was like a training event the other week, actually, and the question came up, do we need to do annual reports? What is the point of an annual report? When actually, if you're going to meet a politician and their staffer sticks in your organization into AI, they can probably get a better summary of what your organization has done in the last year than you writing a 30-page annual report. As long as that information is up on the website and you're promoting constantly what you're doing, then AI can pick that up. So why waste your time writing a report that nobody really reads? And actually the staffer can get that through AI now themselves if you have put the information out there.
And do you think that AI can help public affairs tell the story of the value and the impact of the work they do? Going back to what we were talking about earlier around how do you demonstrate value to members, to internal colleagues, particularly if public affairs is a slightly more complex landscape now?
It's an interesting one. You stumped me there.
Yeah, or maybe same question, but broadened out to tech.
Yeah.
Do you think that technology has a role in enabling public affairs to tell a clearer story of the value they produce?
So in terms of AI and tech helping to tell that story, there's so much engagement that has to be done. And organizations are struggling financially. I work in the charity sector and the third sector. And yes, as across the whole, and we'll find out, when this goes out, we'll know what impact the budget has had on how much budget we then get to do public affairs. But also people want more. You can't just post something on social media now. It needs to have a graphic with it. It needs to have a photo with it. Ideally, it needs to have a video with it. And it's like, well, how do I do that? If you're the only person working in public affairs in Wales, which actually lots of organisations do have that. It is one person doing public affairs, policy, comms in Wales for that organisation. How do they do all of that? And actually, that's where AI can come in. I'm not saying let's make AI videos to put on social media, but I use it for the theatre group that I manage myself. I will put things into AI to come up with posters, suggestions, or, I need a really quick graphic, stick it into AI. It can get your branding, it can work it out. But then you're like, well, actually, hang on, who's controlling the brand management there? If people start using AI to come up with these things. So it is tricky for organizations, but it's how can you adequately represent your organization and use technology to do that when actually we could be potentially facing budget cuts to services and cuts to personnel.
Yeah, it's probably something for us to keep an open mind to, but I think the discussion point around how does public affairs do more with less is a question and a reality I don't think we're going to shift away from anytime soon. And there is subsequently a bit of an open-ended question for me around what impact can software, and which includes AI, have on telling that story and then playing the value back to an internal audience. So that's a really, really thought-provoking end on that point. We're going to shift the topic of conversation ever so slightly. And you have referenced it already because you used to work in the House of Commons. And if my research is correct, you used to work for Chris Skidmore. So what I want to dive into a little bit is there will be some people listening to this episode that maybe don't have the knowledge of Welsh politics, Wales, the Senedd, etc., that you and your peers have. Maybe they're kind of Westminster focused or Brussels focused. Given that you've worked in Westminster and we were talking before we started recording about the job opportunity market in Westminster, can you kind of outline some of the key differences between politics in Westminster, public affairs in Westminster, and here in Wales? So
I had great 2 or 3 years with Chris. He went on to fantastic things, and Yeah, we still speak. So I was his office manager. So I was election agent, and then he asked me to be his office manager once we got him elected in 2010. And my first job was to set up his office. So, when we were at the count, the returning officer gives him a brown envelope from the House of Commons, which has all the information, I say all, the information you need to set up your office. And then that got passed to me, and it's like, right, here you go. We discussed it during the election. We weren't confident of winning, but we were like, oh, well, it might be close, and the tide was coming our way with David Cameron. So we were looking at, where would we have an office? And so, yeah, that was my first job. Get an office, hire staff, and then he would deal with the Westminster side of things because, there's strict process for that. And it was just a deluge of things. But 2010 was a time when you still had casework files. We had to work out how we're going to lock casework paper into filing cabinets. Where are we going to put the filing cabinets? Do we then need to have another lock to stop people getting into those filing cabinets, as well as security? It was just coming out, and having worked in the Senate now and seeing what the security team do for MSs, none of that existed. Nobody came in and said to us, oh, actually, you need to have panic alarms, or actually, you need to have a shutter on your shop window office. None of that was done. So actually, from working from that point of view, it stopped being policy, and it stopped being political bubble stuff. It's actually practical, who takes the bins out, and the expense scandal. It seems a lifetime ago now, where politicians were claiming for toilet roll. Well, they were office costs. How did people expect, especially journalists, how did journalists think an MP's office ran? Like, they needed to buy essential, cleaning, toilet rolls and things like that. And it always came down to the staff to do that. So yeah, so then we spent some time in London, and that was great, meeting lobbyists and engaging there. But it's so much more intense. It certainly was so much more intense. You'd be on the terrace, or you'd be in members, and it's just like everyone's there, and you're having those conversations, and that's where it's slightly different to Wales. There isn't that boozy culture where everyone comes down on a Tuesday night and everyone goes out for meals and things like that. That doesn't exist. Yes, it happens. Yes, we do it, but it's not constant, and it's not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights. It's Tuesday, maybe Wednesday nights as well. It's a lot more relaxed. It's a lot more friendly in terms of getting things done. And actually, you can get small wins quite easily by speaking to an MS who then speaks to the minister. It's not a case of you speak to a backbench MP in Westminster who then speaks to the whip or speaks to a junior minister, then goes to the civil service. No, you just get the MS to speak to the minister, and then things happen. Like, I've really simplified that, but that is the main difference.
One thing I'm keen to explore is the phrase the Westminster bubble, the Brussels bubble. Is there a Cardiff bubble?
We tried to imply there's say on my previous job, we would say the Bay bubble is doing this. If we look back to 20 MPH, in Wales when that came out, and the blanket/default, your Welsh listeners will understand the blanket/default reference. That was a Bay bubble story. Because actually, who cares if it's a blanket or a default setting at 20 MPH? That was a Bay bubble story. So it does exist, and the Welsh Parliament as a whole has an issue of engaging with the Welsh public, demonstrating what it does, demonstrating what it can achieve. And so, yeah, so there's a bubble in that sense, but it's not the same, I don't think, as the Westminster bubble. Our media here is not as strong, as the Westminster media. A story here, can last a couple of days, but actually it might be overtaken by something that's actually happening in the real world, or a nice positive story, that you can look back quite easily and see the scandals that have kept the media agenda. Whilst in Westminster, they would weeks, they churn it up quite happily. We don't get that same level of scrutiny here. So the bubble is kind of more gossipy. It's more, internal, or who's moved offices type thing. For me, it's quite a light bubble, but it stops the outside world of Wales looking in and going, well, actually, what have they achieved? What have they done? And Wales has achieved a lot in devolution.
Thank you. One thing I'm very keen to ask you about, because we talked about this again before we started recording, for the benefit of our listeners, can you talk a bit about the dynamic between the Senate and the civil service?
So yeah, so what we found frustrating, we're working on something at the moment, is there's a civil servant in the Welsh government who there's a vacancy, and the vacancy's been there for months. And we're trying to work out, well, who's their boss? Who can actually make the decision that actually this vacancy needs to be recruited? And speaking to the minister, and the minister says, well, it's not my responsibility. So you then speak to the permanent secretary, and the permanent secretary is like, well, actually, they still default to Westminster, they still default to Whitehall. The permanent secretary's boss is still the permanent secretary in Westminster. And there's a history as well. So in terms of pre-devolution, the civil servants that worked in the Wales office or the departments that covered Wales, who then turned into the Welsh government, they're still there. There's still that legacy of, civil servants talking to civil servants up and down the M4. What are they deciding? What decisions have they made? What information are they sharing about what's going to happen? It was really interesting when there was a Conservative UK government and a Labour Welsh government in terms of information sharing there. How did those governments know what we were doing or what they were planning on doing if those back channels weren't happening? And it was the civil service. So I'm always fascinated as to how they work, how they come up with policy and how they implement policy, and those connections on how can we strengthen devolution. Do we call for a separate Welsh civil service headed by the First Minister? Is it a case at the moment, and I'd be interested to know more on this, is the First Minister taking responsibility for something that isn't actually hers to take responsible for? Is she in a place where actually she can say to civil service, you must do this, or does that countermanded by somebody else? So that's an interesting dynamic of devolution I think needs to be explored.
Absolutely. With a nod to the future, we're going to talk a bit about next year. As I said at the top of the episode, we're recording on budget day, so we're getting towards the end of November as we sit here and speak today. There's obviously some elections coming next year in Holyrood and in the Senedd. They are of monumental significance, not just for the respective geographies here in the UK, but the potential consequences for the UK government. Do you have a view or an inkling as to not only how things may pan out here in Wales, but what impact that's going to have on public affairs?
So the biggest issue is the fact that the Senedd elections, and has always been the case, that actually people will vote based on what's happening at the UK level. They're not potentially, and I'll come on a little bit later, but it might be different for the Senedd next year, but people historically have voted for the party based on what's happening in Westminster. The UK media, that shift now, all the implications for Starmer if and possibly when Labour don't run the Welsh government anymore. Well, why does that matter? That is not a factor that should be considered by the voting public in Wales when it comes to May. It should be about who has the best plan to fix the NHS and the longest waiting times in the UK. What's the plan to get our schools up to scratch? Do we want to build an M4 relief road or not? That is what needs to matter. And the problem with everything that's going on in Westminster and the UK media now framing the Senedd elections as a referendum on Starmer, well, no, you're devaluing devolution by doing that. Actually have some proper scrutiny on what the Welsh government has done for 25 years. There is a bit of change in the air, so I feel sorry for Scottish Labour. I'm sure they were really excited that shift was going to happen up in Scotland. It's not going to be there anymore. But down here in Wales, it is likely that Labour will not form the majority or be the majority partner in the Welsh government come May the 8th, 2026. It's possible that it might be a reform government. And if you look at the polls, certainly as they are now, they are the only party that could squeak into a majority, and that is a long shot, but they could be the largest party here in Wales come May the 8th. Plaid Cymru, Plaid and Reform at the moment are first or second place, depending which poll you look at it. If it was a Plaid majority party, they would do a deal, potentially with Labour, although Labour are saying internally, do we want to? Do we want to play second fiddle to a Plaid government that we've always relied on propping us up and actually haven't been the best friends for the last couple of years? Do we want to go and do that? The Conservatives, interesting because they could end up with nothing, and I get shouted at when I say this, but it could be nothing, or it could be 12, 13, 14, depending on what type of day they have. And I think what it all comes down to is we had a strategy of the 2021 Senedd elections of targeting that general election vote to get them to turn out, to breach that 50%, because if we could get our voters to turn out, we could win, or we could be in touching distance of being the largest party. And they just didn't come out. So we need the Welsh media, we need the UK media to actually talk about what's actually going to happen and what actually matters on the ground. Those NHS waiting lists, whether, they talk about the 8 a.m. phone call for the GP, and like Wings is like, oh well, we've got rid of that. Well, it still happens here in Wales. That's what the media need to be focusing on, to encourage people to vote for a party that will deliver what they want to see.
It's going to be a big year next year, and there's lots of remarks I couldn't make. The point you made at the start around people voting in relation to actually the performance of the UK government is probably the one that alarms me the most, to your point, because if that is essentially a protest vote against the UK government, it's really distracting away from the purpose of devolution, right? So that is something for me to reflect on. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to a few lighter questions before we finish. So for the benefit of our listeners, I've not briefed Paul at all on these, so I'm very intrigued to find out what we're going to hear. The first question is, what would be your one non-negotiable piece of advice for someone who's maybe starting out their public affairs career in Cardiff or Wales more broadly today?
It would be that emailing of politicians. Personalise it. Take the time. Yes, it takes me a whole working day sometimes, but personalise it as much as you can. Having been on the other side, seeing the emails come in, and you just get a dear all. Okay, great, thanks. That I've stopped scrolling. And it's little things like check how it's actually going to be received. So, the Senate has I'm giving away trade secrets here. The Senate has an email address for all MSs. So you can just pop one email address in and it goes to all 60. But our system was slightly different. So speak to an MS, speak to a staffer, get to know staffers is the main thing. When you're meeting an MS and the staffer stood next to them, speak to them, engage them, bring them into the conversation. Because then when you want to send out an email to the MSs, ask that staffer, can I just send you a test email? How does it appear on your system? Okay, that's fine. Because the amount of times you get something and the system's squashed the picture, or the signature's massive and it's taken up and the font's really small. Have those relationships and judge and test yourself. Could you do that with someone? Could you pick up the phone, send them a text, send them an email, and ask them to do that test for them? Because I think that's a mark as to whether or not you're doing your right job as public affairs.
Very good advice there. Thank you. You've obviously been in and around public affairs, politics for a long time, 15 years or so. What would you say your favourite or your best party conference story is?
See, this way I should have got my lawyer to check these ones. I think the funniest thing, well, not the funniest thing. So we were having a conference in Llangollen, and one of the hotels I was staying in were really excited that we'd done a block booking for them. So they decided to decorate all the nice rooms that we'd booked. It's like, okay, that's really nice of them. But what they'd done is they'd painted the window shut. So for 2 nights, I was sleeping in a freshly painted room. And I didn't realise this, but I was actually getting paint poisoning. So I thought I was just hungover from the various events you go through. And actually, no, I was like, I've not drunk anything. How am I so ill? And yeah, it was breathing in paint fumes whilst trying to manage backstage and the main stage events and policy and comms at our party conference. Completely ridiculous, but we did it.
I won't, for legal reasons, I won't ask you to name the hotel. That's that's maybe not a. I don't really know what to say. You're okay now though, right?
Yeah. No, it was only after a couple of days it disappeared, but it was constantly feeling like you're hungover. It's a really weird sensation, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're just hungover, Paul." And I was like, "No, actually, I'm really unwell." I
can't open the windows in my hotel.
Yes, yeah. And I think people forget how much goes on to make a conference happen. Having to pull people together. It wasn't our main function. Other parties have proper conference teams that do this. No, we would just pull it together and make something happen.
Thank you.
That's the cleanest conference story I could.
Maybe. Who's your favourite Prime Minister?
I have a massive soft spot for David Cameron. I really do. I don't know. He was leader of the opposition when I joined the Conservative Party. He was leader of the opposition when I started working for the Conservative Party. His engagement, he always made you feel like you were the most important person in the room when you saw him. Do I agree with everything he did? Not entirely, but actually I felt reassured that he was taking us in the right direction. And I think that's what people want nowadays in our Prime Minister is they want a leader. They want someone, like, doesn't matter if Starmer's vision is right or wrong, have a vision. That's where you need to go. And then people will follow you because you have a vision, you know where you are going. And too many politicians, I think, end up not knowing where they want to end up at. And therefore they lose people. But yeah, massive soft spot for DC. Although I did embarrass myself. I was a trainee agent in Milton Keynes South, and we were helping at party conference. Part of our job was to be the stewards at party conference nationally at the UK level. And we all got lined up, there's the new recruits, and he came down the line, oh, where are you from? What's your name? What are you doing? And he came to me and I said I was in Milton Keynes South. And he was like, oh, so what's the majority there? And I said, oh, it's about so-and-so. He's like, well, I think it's actually this. And he listed the correct majority, the candidate, what the Conservative vote last time was, who the Labour MP was. Like, his detail his knowledge for detail was incredible. And I was just like, I'll catch it, yeah. And that was a lesson I learned straight away, that I need to know all the facts and figures. And I think that's a point generally for people in public affairs. If you can demonstrate that knowledge off the top of your head, like for Wales, who's next on the list if so-and-so steps down, people respect that. And yeah, so I learned a lot quite quickly that I need to know this information.
Some very good lessons learned there. The next question is, who's the best Prime Minister that the UK's never had?
David Miliband. I was a massive David Miliband fan. Maybe I've got a thing for David here. Yeah, no, certainly in recent politics, I just think he would have... What frustrated me about the Corbyn era is that the UK government got away with so much because... So even if David Miliband hadn't become Prime Minister, if he'd just been the leader of the opposition, that opposition would have been so much stronger. I wonder what would have changed. Would Brexit have happened? Would the deal for Brexit have been different? Would the parties have come, not to blame lots on Jeremy Corbyn, but him not coming out and supporting the EU, did that have an impact? So I just think how much could have changed if David Miliband had actually beaten his brother. And yeah, we watched the result when it came out, and we were like, oh, that's great for us. Yay. But we didn't realise that the next person down the line wouldn't actually be any better.
There's a lot I could say about that. But for the benefit of our listeners, I won't. We've just got two more questions, and it's on the theme of leaders. Who's been your favourite First Minister?
Mark Drakeford, because he gets it. And, I'm not a big fan of, not to upset anyone, of SPADs becoming politicians. They're two separate entities, two separate jobs. I think you need to make your choice earlier on as to what you want to do, whether or not you have a career outside politics, doing something that engages you with normal, ordinary people, then go into standing for election, or you go down the policy route and you end up as SPAD. I think they're two different roles. But Mark has done a great job in blending that. He gets it, he understands it, and he knows what he can do. We were in a meeting with him, and we asked a question, and he was just like, well, it's fine, because he'd done the math, he'd done the arithmetic. He knew that he could agree to what we wanted without anybody else. It's like, fine, great, switched on. Yeah.
Very good to work with, I imagine.
Yes, yeah. Didn't get to work with him much, but I think what we did achieve was good.
And the final question is, and this relates to the First Minister as well, given your knowledge, given your expertise, given your network, who do you think is a good future First Minister for Wales?
So in terms of the next First Minister, it will probably be Reen. As we record, Reform haven't announced who their candidates are, who their leader in Wales is. There's a couple of good people there that could easily be the First Minister. In terms of the current crop, thinking about some Conservatives, Sam Rowland's, business background, knows what he wants. Tom Gifford, kind of same sort of style, but comes from the public sector. Hugh Rankin-Davies brings that Westminster experience. He's currently Deputy First Minister. He would be a good First Minister. Really like Lynyd. Lynyd at the moment, she is, I don't want to say normal, but, she's engaging. She's, she says what she wants to say. Fine, great. I think we just need to see more of her ahead of election. I think if Labour want to turn it around a bit more. There are some great councillors who are hoping to stand for election. So yeah, there's a lot of potential out there. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
We will. Paul, this has been really, really fun. Thank you so much. My thanks, of course, to my colleague Ollie Foster, who's our in-house producer. Perhaps you have a view on the future of public affairs and the future of public affairs here in Wales, and you'd like to share it with us, or maybe you'd even like to add to the discussion yourself. Please follow the link in the show's bio, which will direct you to our feedback page for Elio Intelligence, which is the home of de Havilland and Forefront.